Howdy. Thanks, Josh. Just to clarify, we'll end formally at 12:15 Eastern, and then those who want to stay on for another 15 minutes of Q&A are invited to do so.
1:15 Eastern.
I apologize. 12:15 Central, where I am 1:15 Eastern. Thank you. I also just really want to thank Valerie, a dear friend in practice now for a number of years, for your tremendous generosity and kindness, and for really enabling us all to be here during this special week. A couple of things I want to say before we jump into the content. First of all, I want to affirm that you already have everything that you need to be successful in this journey this week. So maybe you can even just take a moment now and put your hand on your heart and affirm for yourself, I have all that I need. I have all that I need. I'm not going to get something external to myself and acquire it and take it into myself and get somewhere, right, that I can't get to normally. Instead, we're going to be working directly with our own body, our own heart, our own mind, our own experience, our own consciousness, right? And these are dimensions of our being that are always with us. And so we already have everything that we need to be successful. And I also want to say that, especially in the spirit of Valerie's dedication today, I'll be offering some modifications. So if at any point you feel overwhelmed by any of the practices, or if you become triggered or you find yourself outside of your window of tolerance, you'll be able to follow my modifications, and in that way keep yourself safe and well-resourced and supported here in this space. I'm going to be grounding a lot of our learning this week in Hasidic text. We will be learning some technical terms, some of which come from Kabbalah. And don't worry, I'll be translating and explaining everything. So if you have no knowledge of Kabbalah, you'll be able to find a way in. And also, the Hasidic writings we're going to be studying represent a particular milieu with a particular worldview or set of worldviews. I just want to affirm that you may or may not find yourself in these texts. And I want to encourage you to translate them in whatever way makes them workable for you, and use what works and leave the rest by the wayside. What's important here is that whatever I'm teaching is really just fodder for contemplation, right? And for checking out what's true in the laboratory of our own experience. But I want you to trust your experience above all else. Even though IJS has roots both in the Neo-Hasidic and the Buddhist meditation traditions, we're going to be sourcing everything during this series from Jewish sources. Because one of the goals that I have for us is to really discern the ways in which prayer in our tradition has been the home address for Jewish meditation. And in addition to that, I also hope that we will find a way into Jewish prayer that feels accessible and that helps us to cultivate ourselves spiritually. And I realize that many of us may have a very wonderful relationship with Jewish prayer, and many of us also may have a very difficult relationship with Jewish prayer. So whatever your relationship with Jewish prayer, you're welcome. And I want to assure you that we're going to be working directly with our moment-to-moment experience. That's going to be our gateway into the practice. And there's no dogma here. So feel free to push back, and there will be an opportunity for Q&A and so on and so forth. So without further ado, I'd like to jump in. I really just want to say this topic is really near and dear to my heart. Contemplative Jewish prayer has been a very sustaining and nurturing practice for me for many, many, many years. And I'm delighted to be able to share with you some of what I've experienced and some of what I know. So we're going to be looking now at a source sheet. And Adi, who's working his magic behind the scenes here, can drop the link for those who may want to download a version of it. I'm going to be sharing my screen so we can all look together. Just bear with me for 1 second. Okay. Try here. I'm having a little bit of trouble. Let's see if this works. No, I don't think that worked.
Sam, I have it pulled up on my end.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks. For some reason, the computer's not giving me the option to select my web browser. Okay, great. Thanks so much, Adi. We're only going to see one text on this sheet in the original Hebrew. The reason is that the others don't exist in printable form in the original Hebrew, at least not that I had at my fingertips. But I can get you the original Hebrew if you'd like a copy. So just let me know. Feel free to follow along in Hebrew or English. We're going to be looking at a couple of different sources here. And today's topic is prayer as a spiritual journey. And I want to say, again, by way of introduction, that if I were to ask you what prayer is, right, I suspect that many of you might answer, it's a conversation with God, right? It's going to services. And all of that's beautiful, right? And there may be many, many other answers. But the way that the Jewish contemplative tradition understands prayer really is as a spiritual journey. And it's meant to take us from point A to point B and back again. And that's what we're going to be exploring today. Where might we begin? Where might the journey take us? And to where might we return? And we're going to be relying primarily on Jewish mystical texts. So the first is actually from the Zohar, the classical work of Kabbalah. The Zohar here, which is a commentary on the Torah, a mystical commentary on the Torah, which really goes verse by verse in explicating what the Torah means on a mystical level or on a variety of mystical levels. Here's commenting on the dream that Jacob had, right? Jacob's ladder. And we know this story, right? Jacob was escaping for fear of being murdered by his brother after stealing the blessings from his brother Esau. He stops for the night and he puts some stones, actually one under his head, and goes to sleep. And there in this liminal space, he has a dream, right? The text says, Jacob dreamed, and behold, a ladder was planted on the ground. And we know that in the dream, right, angels were ascending and descending the ladder and so on and so forth. And then eventually Jacob wakes up, right? And he says to himself, oh my God, right? Manora hamakom hazeh, how awe-inspiring is this place, right? Ein zekiim beit Elohim v'zeh shar hashamayim. This is none other than the house of the Lord. And this right here is the gateway to heaven, right? And he concludes that indeed divinity was present in that place and he didn't even know it, right? It was right there and he didn't even know it. So just keep all of that in mind as we turn here to the Zohar, which comments on, behold, a ladder, says the Zohar, right? The verse itself is in bold and the Zohar's commentary is in regular font. Says the Zohar, this is prayer, right? Jacob's ladder, you want to know what it really was? It was prayer, right? The ladder is a symbol for prayer. Planted on the ground, says the Zohar, for we humans pray to the one on the earthly plane, right? We pray to the divine on the earthly plane. We are planted on the ground when we pray. And which is understood by the Zohar as the Shekhinah, or the divine presence. The element of God that is manifest, right, is here in the earthly plane with us. And that's essentially, we're praying within that plane, the totality of which is understood as the Shekhinah, the divine presence. And we're a part of that totality. And our prayer then reaches heaven, which is understood by the Zohar as another dimension of divinity, the Holy and Blessed One, Kudsha Brichu, about whom is written, you will hear in heaven. Right? You will hear in heaven. So what we find in the Zohar is that prayer is actually that which bridges the gap between heaven and earth. right? We here on this earthly embodied plane, we pray, and our prayer somehow travels up a ladder, right? And reaches the transcendent plane and is then received and heard by the divine. But notice that in the Zoharic text, even though prayer now is instrumental, it's a journey, right? It's meant to take our prayerful intention and our prayerful speech from one dimension to the next, right? There's still a gap between us and the ultimate destination of our prayer. And prayer may be the ladder, right, that allows our prayer, prayerful intention and our prayer speech to ascend, but there's still a gap. Okay. Turn now to Rabbi Shalom Dov Ber of Lubavitch. Adi, thanks for scrolling down. Rabbi Shalom Dov Ber of Lubavitch was the fifth rabbi of Lubavitch. Many of us are familiar with the seventh Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, Menachem Mendel Schneerson. But two rabbis before him, there was a rabbi named Shalom Ber who lived in Lubavitch, the actual town of Lubavitch, during the early 20th century. And he wrote a book on prayer as meditation called Kuntras HaAvodah, which means the discourse on spiritual practice. Often in our tradition, the word avodah, spiritual practice, is associated with prayer as well. And here he continues to understand prayer as a ladder. What we'll notice is that he bridges the gap between heaven and earth. So pay close attention. The avodah, or the spiritual practice of the heart in prayer, is a labor leading to love of the divine. Right? It's not anymore that we need to somehow get to some transcendent realm beyond the here and now, but through this practice, we can cultivate a deeper quality of love for the divine. Right? It's a heart-opening practice. Right? It's meant to take us from having a closed heart to having an open heart. As such, he says it serves two purposes. The first is to help us cleave to the divine. This is called in Hebrew dveikut, right? A state of cleaving, the soul cleaving to its source, essentially, to its divine, to its infinite divine source. Right? That's called dveikut. So the first purpose of prayer is to cleave to the divine in order to unite our divine soul with divinity itself, essentially for our soul to become absorbed within its source. Right? The second is to purify and refine our animal soul. That language, animal soul, might be a little bit jarring, right? But in the Hasidic tradition, in the Kabbalistic tradition, the soul is understood to have a more transcendent part and a more earthly part, which is governed more by impulse, right? And our survival instinct, our desires, our cravings, our aversions, our preferences, right? Our pursuit of pleasure and comfort. And so he's saying that prayer serves two purposes. The first is to cultivate this kind of dveikut, where the soul actually cleaves to its source, right? And the second is that we can actually refine our negative karma, essentially, right? The parts of us that tend to act out of impulse can be refined and elevated and used in the service of the divine. Goes on to say in the first case here, and we'll get into the question of purifying our karma later in the week, right? But coming back to this piece around dveikut, right? Cleaving to the divine, we understand prayer, tefillah in Hebrew, right? That's the word for prayer in Hebrew. It's a reflexive verb, tefillah, to mean joining, as in the word tofel, another Hebrew verb, which refers to joining pieces of ceramic together. Right? So essentially the word tefillah, he understands to mean bringing two things that were disparate together, bridging the gap between these two things. This definition of prayer refers to joining our divine soul with the transcendent one. And in this case, prayer is also called a ladder, right? Which we already saw in the Zohar, as in the verse which describes a ladder placed on the earth with its head reaching into the heavens. Right? This is the part that the Zohar did not comment on necessarily. At least not in the same way, right? Which is to say that our prayer, it helps us to actually join with the divine. It's not that our prayer somehow travels up to some transcendent realm, right? But it allows us, our very being, right? Our spiritual essence, our soul, right? To be absorbed within its divine source. So now there's no gap, right? At least if one does the prayer according to the way that's prescribed in this source, right? The gap disappears. We find ourselves in a non-dual state where the soul is actually absorbed into its divine source. This means that we unite the essence of our soul with its source in the infinite light of the Holy One. We achieve this in the course of praying the Amidah, which is the pinnacle of prayer, also the silent prayer, right? When these different dimensions of our soul, nefesh, ruach, and neshama, ascend and are included in this supernal unity, Okay, so don't worry if you don't know what those words nefesh, ruach, and neshama mean, because I'm going to explain right now. Okay, but essentially the idea is that when we arrive at the Amidah, the silent prayer, right, what could be happening there, and we may not have ever imagined that this was even possible, but what could be happening there, he's saying if we do the work correctly, or the way that he's prescribing it, is that the lower dimensions of our being become subsumed within our spiritual essence, which then unites with its source. And we experience a non-dual state of communion, as it were, with the divine totality, the divine infinity of Ein Sof, right, of that which has no end. Okay. Adi, if you could scroll down, there's a chart at the bottom that I'd like to look at together now for just a moment. Okay. So there's a lot of terms here, but I'm going to walk you through this relatively quickly. Don't worry, if something is unclear, we're going to come back to this chart every single day. Okay. And this essentially represents the journey, okay, that he's describing, which in the Kabbalistic tradition and then in the Hasidic tradition is called Sulam Ha'aliyah, or the ladder of ascent. The ladder of ascent, where the soul ascends from its more kind of earthly dimensions, right, up and up and up until it reaches its more transcendent dimensions, and then eventually becomes absorbed within its source. Okay, and the Kabbalah speaks of 4 worlds, right, at the macrocosmic level. 4 worlds. There's the world of asiya, of doing and acting, and these are all different words for making, creating. Asiya, the world of acting or doing. Then there's a higher world than that called the world of Yetzira, which is the world of forming. Right? And then there's a higher world than that called Bria, the world of creating. And then the highest world is called Atzilut, which means nearness, or the world of pure emanation, right? Like the word etzel, which means next to, right? The world, the manifest part of creation that is the closest to the divine infinite source from which creation flows. Okay, so you can see already how doing and acting are very embodied, right? Forming also somewhat, creating. We can actually create things with our mind, right? We can create things with our mind. We don't have to use our hands. And then Atzilut represents something that is even more subtle and more expansive than that. And the Hasidim understand that on the soul level, on the level of the microcosm, on the level of each of us has a dimension of our soul that corresponds to each of these worlds. Right? So the first is nefesh. These are essentially 4 out of 5 words that are used in our tradition to describe the soul. Nefesh, which is our embodied soul, right? Or a capacity to become conscious of what's happening in the body here and now, right? We all know that we can be driving somewhere. Have you ever had this experience? And then you don't know how you got there, right? That means there was very little consciousness in the body. The body was just acting kind of based on habit. And a part of the nervous system that, doesn't need much consciousness to be able to perform tasks. But we can become conscious within the body, right? The next dimension, which is subtler, is called ruach, right? Which means wind or spirit. And that's our emotional consciousness, which is to say, right, we can have all kinds of feelings, and sometimes we are not aware of them or conscious of them, and we can actually become conscious of emotions arising and passing away, expressing themselves, and so on and so forth. That's a subtler experience, right? Consciousness of our emotions can be a subtler experience than consciousness of our concrete embodied existence. Not that emotions are divorced from our embodied experience. Of course, emotions have a somatic correlative, right, and expression, but pure emotion is a little subtler. And then if we go a little bit deeper and subtler still, we get to the neshama, which is called the cognitive soul or the cognitive consciousness, which is to say, right, we have the ability to be aware that we have a mind and that the mind is active, right? It's thinking, it's creating images, it's creating ideas, right? And then finally, there's a part of us which is pure soul, which is called in the Kabbalistic tradition chaya, right? Which means the one that is alive or the vitalizing soul. That refers to our transpersonal or pure consciousness, right? This is the part of us that actually transcends our individual identity, our individual mind, right? Our individual heart, our individual body. And that as such is really pure spirit, pure soul. It's formless, it's boundless, right? And if you look, right, there are different ways of knowing that go along with each of these dimensions of consciousness. So, right, the way that we know in the body is through sensing. The way that we know in the heart is through feeling. The way that we know in the mind is through thinking or contemplating, right? And then there's this quality of intuitive awareness or pure awareness, right? Whose very inherent quality is that of knowing spaciousness, right? Or cognizant spaciousness. So we're going to be exploring all of these on a concrete level within our own being. I don't want you to take my word for any of this, but this is basically the Kabbalah's way of talking about all of the inner dimensions of our being. Okay. And what you'll see here on the right is that according to the Hasidic tradition, each part of the morning prayer service corresponds to one dimension of our soul. And it serves, if we can use it in a way that I'm going to teach you how, to be able to actually more deeply awaken that quality of soul, so that that quality of soul can then become a kind of vehicle for the next quality of soul to rest upon, right? And then that next quality of soul can become a vehicle for the next quality of soul to rest upon until we get to the Amidah, the silent prayer, where we can experience the most transcendent element of our soul. And under some very, if we're very lucky, right, the soul can actually unite with its source. And you'll also notice that if you look at the rightmost column, right, the first three qualities of soul and the first three parts of the prayer service, the morning blessings, the verses of song, and Shema and its blessings, they still correspond to the ego, which is to say, right, anybody with a healthy ego has a body. They know they have a body, right? They have feelings. They know they have feelings, and they have thoughts. Okay, but the fourth dimension, which corresponds to our intuitive awareness, right, or the Amidah part of the prayer, right, that is a part of us that is egoless, without self, right? Or alternatively, we might describe it as self with a capital S, depending on which tradition we're operating within. And the Hasidic tradition calls that part of us ayin, which means literally capital N, no thing, nothing, right? Emptiness, nothing. I don't want you to take my word for any of this, but I want us to understand the map, right? Because according to Maimonides, the ladder that Jacob dreamed about had 4 rungs. And in the Kabbalah, those 4 rungs are associated with each of these dimensions of our inner life. And the idea is as you climb inwardly, right? Or perhaps it's more accurate to say as you delve deeply, right, into your inner life and go deeper and deeper and deeper, you begin to encounter subtler and subtler and subtler dimensions of your being until you get to pure spirit. Right? And from that place, it's much easier to feel ourselves connected to an infinite source of pure, luminous consciousness that has no limits or boundaries. So what I'd like to do today, actually, and Adi, you can stop the screen share. We're actually not going to do any prayer practice today, but I want us to begin to become familiar with the terrain. Okay. Because whenever you go on a journey, right, and this is true even before we had a GPS, right, right? And sorry, I apologize. This is true even now that we have a GPS. It's a good idea to know where you're headed, right? So the first thing you do is you plug in the address where you're going, right? And in the olden days, I remember taking a trip with my dad up the St. Lawrence Seaway from New York, to go to a music camp one summer. And, we had a triptych. So we basically knew where we were going. And if we can know the terrain and we can kind of familiarize ourselves with each part of the journey, then when we actually combine prayer practice with this map and pray from within each of these domains, it's going to be easier for us to have a sense for, okay, where am I headed now? Where am I situated now? Where was I? And so on and so forth. So we don't feel totally lost. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to meditate together. And usually we provide about 10 minutes of silence. Today, I'm going to be talking a little bit more. And then during the next 4 days, we'll have more silent time. But today I want to guide us through these 4 dimensions of our being. Okay. And don't worry if you don't really feel like you have a good handle on the map after today's meditation. We're going to come back to the map every single day, and we're going to work on each dimension in its own right. And then on the final day, we'll put them all together in prayer as meditation. So let's get situated in our seats, and we can rock a little bit from side to side until we find a balance point. The body will naturally come into a point of balance and equilibrium. And you can keep your eyes open and downcast if that feels more sustaining for you today, or alternatively, you can close your eyes. Really, whichever feels safe and regulating for you here and now. And let's take a couple of deep breaths and let go of any tension on the out breath. Oxygenate the blood and the brain on the in breath. Breathe all the way down into your belly and release the breath slowly and steadily. And then little by little, you can simply allow the breath to be natural without trying to hold it or extend it or make it any particular way at all. Relax the muscles in the face, relax the muscles in the shoulders, in the jaw, in the chest, in the back, and the abdomen. And we settle. And first we enter the world of asiya, the world of the body, the concrete element of our being. There's the material asiya, right, which is this form of the body, the sense of its edges and its being separate from everything else. But if we turn our attention down into the body, as it were, using our inner eye, as it were, the eye of mindfulness, we can permeate the body with consciousness. And this is called the spiritual asiya, the world of spiritual awareness in the body. And see if you can become aware of the whole body. Not any particular sensation, not any particular embodied phenomenon, just that there is a body. a body that's sitting, a body that's breathing. A body that senses and feels itself. You might rub your hands together, sensing touch. You might notice sounds arising and passing away. On the in-breath, you might pick up scents, subtle or gross. You may notice the play of shadow and light on the eyelids if the eyes are closed, or in the world around you if your eyes are open. You may notice flavors in the mouth, the sense of wetness, warmth, hardness, softness. You're accessing your embodied consciousness. The body itself knows from within the body what it's like to have a body. And then we will move in a little bit deeper. Beyond the retaining wall of our being, this body, to our emotional life. I invite you to bring your attention to your heart center, actual center of your chest. And if this feels in any way dysregulating or overwhelming, you can instead focus your attention on other the parts of the body where you might feel emotion. Perhaps the brow, the jaw, the neck. Simply become aware of whatever emotions may be present here and now. You can begin with sensation and then notice if a label might spontaneously arise. This is anger, this is joy, this is confusion, this is love, this is jealousy, this is hatred, this is delight. So now we're in the world of Yetzira, in the soul dimension of Ruach. And we know there is a heart that feels. Moving into the third station on our journey, I want to invite you to become aware of the contents of your own mind, bearing witness to them as if from a watchtower. Thoughts, images, ideas, plans, memories. See if you can just watch them come and watch them go and know there is a mind. And as you engage in this kind of mindfulness, you're now in the world of Bria, world of tremendous creativity and activity. But still part of the ego. In this dimension, you're still a something or a someone. This world, of course, is much subtler than the world of emotions or the world of the body. We can go a whole day without having any awareness of the contents of our mind. But this isn't the subtlest world we inhabit. There's also the witness, the one that knows thoughts, feelings, and sensations as they arise and pass away. This awareness or consciousness at the deepest depths of our being. You might notice how even as a thought comes and goes, the space that it's inhabiting isn't a thought, is it? It's just pure light, pure knowing, pure spaciousness. A sensation may come and go. But even as it passes, this consciousness remains. See if you can allow your own consciousness to come to know itself, as it were, sinking back into itself and knowing its own qualities as formless, limitless, luminous, knowing. And when you're ready, you can let that go. And you can give yourself a little heart massage, bringing yourself back down into the body. When you're ready, you can open your eyes.
Thank you, Sam. Please stick around if you want to offer reflections or comments or observations or ask questions of Sam. We will get to those in a minute. As we do daily, we want to give those who are saying Kaddish and remembering somebody the chance to do that. And so I invite you to share the name if you'd like of anyone that you're remembering today saying Kaddish. And you're welcome to also unmute and join me in reciting Morning Kaddish, and then we'll come back for the Q&A. Yitkadal v'yitkadash Alma divra chirutei Amen.
Shmei Rabbi Barak Ba'olam Olam Yit Barak Yishtabach Yit Rama Yit Naseh Yit Hadar Yit Hadle Yit Hala Shmei Kedusha Baruchu Ha'el Berakata V'Shirata Tushbachata V'Nechemata Kamiran B'Alma V'Mru Amen Amen Shlama Rabba Mishmaya V'Chaim Aleinu V'Yakol Yisrael V'Mru Amen Oseh Shalom B'Romav Huya Aseh Shalom Aleinu V'Yakol Yisrael V'Yakol Yoshvei Tevel V'Mru Amen
Amen.
Amen.
Okay. Thank you again. Please do stick around until 30 after the hour. We have some time for Q&A and reflections if you need to leave us now. Thank you. Sam will be back here tomorrow and all this week at 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 here in the Central Time Zone, or wherever you are. So Sam, wow, like where to even start with that? I'm sure there are questions, and I want to invite you to put those questions or observations in the chat. I'm going to start with a very practical one for you. And we've been friends for 20 years, but I don't think I've ever asked you this question. Is for you personally in your own practice, what kind of time do you give yourself to go through this practice, and how does that work with being part of a prayer community, right, in a synagogue, or because most shuls, certainly the one we go to, doesn't necessarily line up with that doesn't create that kind of environment. So I'm curious how you approach that.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Well, I've done this practice alone quite a bit, as well as in community. I'll just say first that one of the ways that I inspired by the Hasidic prayer tradition, which is just so rich and really a gem that I can't even begin to describe in its vastness and beauty and practicality as well, is to understand what we're doing when we do prayer practice as the work of cultivating an inner mishkan, right? If you remember the tabernacle, the mishkan was portable, right? It went with the people. So once we have a good sense for the terrain and we know how to do this work from within the prayer practice itself, which is what I'm going to start teaching us to do tomorrow, then we can carry this kind of an inner tabernacle with us, right? Wherever we go, whether we're in a solitary situation or whether we're with community, right? So I'll just say, for me personally, it's very easy to drop into this terrain, right, when I'm praying in community, and to discover, right, at the depths of my being, the beauty of my own soul, right, the vastness of my own soul, right, the part of me that is, chip off the old divine block, as it were, as Rabbi Jonathan Slater sometimes likes to say, right? This part of divinity that's right here in me, right, at the deepest depths of my being, and commune with that part and address my prayer to that part. In terms of time, sometimes I have 5 minutes, sometimes I have an hour and a half. I mean, I sit and meditate every day formally for an hour, and I try to incorporate some element of this practice into my meditation every day, even if it's not for the entire hour, right? But the more you become practiced in this, the quicker you can drop into each stage, right, into each part of the map, right, into each station, and the easier it is to find your way back to spirit, to pure spirit, right? So what I'll traditionally do is, I'll call, as I'm davening in the morning, I'll call small snippets of prayer from each of the 4 parts of the morning service, and I'll use them to access and deepen these different qualities of consciousness, right? Until ultimately I come to the Amidah, which is a place of union. And then the trick after that is, right, to take what you glean there and bring it back into your life. And we'll talk about that on Friday. Because we don't want to just have these rarefied states of communion with pure divinity, right, or with our own soul. We want that to then inform how we show up in our marriages and our parenting lives and our work lives and our retirement lives and our activism, and everything that we do, really. Yeah. So what I'm going to teach you over the next couple of days is how to access these parts of our being through prayer as meditation, right? In a contemplative idiom. B, how to know when you've kind of reached each individual stage and are ready to move on to the next, right? And then C, how do we bring this into our lives?
And that responds actually to some of the questions here have been like, when do I know when I'm at each stage, right? And so so stay tuned. I think is part of the answer there. And there's several questions, so I want to see if we can just get to a few of these. First of all, I just love that Shefa, added a comment here. Shefa Gold, our teacher, right, about the difficulty of just there's so many words, right? And so acknowledging that, you don't have to respond to it right now, but I just wanted to give that space and voice here. And Ruthie also has a wonderful observation. Ruthie Gelfarb, I have a hard time experiencing consciousness and cannot distinguish how it differs from thought. That's a really interesting point. I'm going to read a few of these, and then Sam, how about you respond to, here's a great question from Mir Diamond. Is it our prayers that are ascending the ladder, or are the souls, or our souls or / being? Is that what's ascending the ladder? And so you can respond to that question. And then one more I'll get to from Laura is, with regard to the 4 soul levels, should one aspire to chaya or simply welcome nefesh or ruach or neshama? Okay, so why don't you pick
Yeah, I'll go backwards, right? I'll go backwards. Yeah. In terms of the question of aspiring to Chaya, the power of being able to abide in Chaya consciousness, which is to say, right, to be able to actually rest in pure consciousness, is that all dimensions of the ego, whether it's the body, right, our feelings, or our thoughts, which keep telling us I'm a separate self, right? I'm in the center of things. Right? As long as we're clinging to any one of those dimensions, there's going to be suffering. And the beauty of being able to rest in Chaya consciousness is that we begin to realize, oh, right, I'm not actually, I am on a relative level, a body, heart, mind, right? But on an absolute level, I'm pure consciousness or loving awareness, which is innately spacious and free, innately compassionate, innately luminous, right? So it helps us to be able to step out of the ego perspective into that perspective, right? Which is much vaster and free, right? Mm-hmm. If you were to ask yourself, and I do this all the time, like if I'm feeling angry, right? I'll look back to Chaya and I'll say, is pure consciousness angry? No, anger is arising in consciousness, but the consciousness itself is not angry, right? It's spacious, luminous, compassionate, awake, right? Expansive, free. So it helps to be able to access that part of ourselves. But what our tradition is pointing out, and we're going to get into this much more deeply tomorrow and the days after, is that it's not advisable to go straight there for a couple of reasons, right? First, we need to have a kind of scaffold that helps us to get there by degree, so that when we do get there, we have a firm foundation to help us kind of stabilize that awareness, right? Imagine, someone airlifts you to the top of a mountain and you see the beautiful vista, and it's just mind-blowingly beautiful and open and spacious, but actually, because they airlifted you up there, you don't know how to get up there yourself when someone leaves you at the bottom of the mountain and hands you some hiking boots and says, okay, hike to the top, right? So you kind of have to rely on almost, serendipity to get straight to Chaya. Whereas if you can work by degree, as I'm suggesting here, not only visiting each station, but then integrating it within the next one, right? Including it, as it were, within the next one. Then when you have a taste of Chaya, it's more stable, and you can stabilize it more consistently in your life. Mm-hmm. And be aware of its presence, even as you're acting from one of the other dimensions or multiple of the other dimensions. Final thing I want to say is none of these are ever separate from each other, right? For purposes of getting really clear and kind of pointing us toward the terrain, we atomize them from one another, right? But you can check this out using your mindfulness. Whenever you're having a thought, there's something happening on the level of sensation in the body. The same is true whenever you're having an emotion, and usually there's also a flurry of thoughts accompanying an emotion, right? Or mental activity, right? And all of that's happening under the kind of watchful eye of pure consciousness, right? This kind of most fundamental dimension of our being. So I want to say, right, it's not like if you get to Chaya, everything else disappears. Right? Mm-hmm. It continues to be there. There can still be thoughts there, but they're not troubling, and they don't captivate you or pull you in the same way as they would otherwise. But we don't have to get rid of our thoughts. We don't have to get rid of our body. We don't have to get rid of our emotions. In fact, right, these dimensions of our being can continue to be there and operate, but we recognize that we're much, much more than that.
I want to be mindful of the time. also, and respect yours and and all of ours.
Yep.
As we've been here for close to an hour. I know there's a number of questions left. First of all, we have 4 more days. But second, Sam, if folks wanted to email questions in, and that way we could be prepared, and maybe we could get an FAQ even
Yep.
that we could prepare either at the end of the week or something like that. Maybe that would be a good way to do this.
Yeah, no problem. I'm Sam at jewishspirituality.org. You can all feel free to email me, and we'll keep a log of those questions. In terms of Mira's question of are the prayers ascending or is our soul ascending? What I was suggesting is that in the Zoharic model, our prayers ascend. But in the Hasidic model, our soul, through the vehicle of meditative prayer, ascends, right? From its more concrete dimensions to its more subtle dimensions until it finally reaches the place of proximity to the limitless source. And then we make the journey back down again.
And something you didn't mention, I think at the beginning, but that goes with this teaching is actually, if you've been through the Gift of Awareness, our online program, one of the things that we teach is when we assume a dignified and upright posture, sort of 101 move of mindfulness meditation practice. Sam, one of the ways you describe that is imagine being Jacob's ladder, right? Grounded in the earth, and that its head ascending towards heaven, and just as a beautiful image of what we're actually doing, and here tied very much to then the activity we're trying to do as well.
Exactly, except the verbiage is, or the image is a little bit misguiding, because it seems very, very vertical, right? Like we somehow need to transcend it. Actually, in reality, the journey is an inwardly directed journey.
Right. All right. More to come. Thank you, everybody, for being with us today for the first day of this week. We welcome you back tomorrow, same bat time, same bat channel. And we will see you. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you tomorrow. Take care.